What is up, folks? This is June 2022's AskJK. You ask questions in the YouTube community tab about my favorite staff foods. Am I ever going to own a restaurant? Staging abroad, pop-ups, and more, and these are my answers. Before we get into this episode of AskJK, I have a ton of great questions I'm really excited to answer from you folks. I am trying an experiment with this episode, and so this is kind of worst practices I can do for YouTube. But consider this me making you aware of a change and a different listening option you can have for content like this. I'm certainly a fan of podcasters that I follow and subscribe to, putting out these like 8 to 15 minute episodes, which are great for like mini commutes, or like if you're cleaning and you just want to pop your headphones in and you can just get some stuff done and listen to something along the way. These are going to be split up by question, and so you can just kind of take a look at those. It's not the 1 hour long interview or in-depth conversation. We certainly have those, and we've had great guests on like Chef Christian Puglisi, Harold McGee, and I have some great interviews lined up going into the fall, so there's never been a better time to subscribe. If you want to watch here on YouTube as you normally have with the questions up on screen, that's coming up next, but I just wanted to make you aware, subscribe to the Repertoire Podcast. First question comes from Ben. What are some of your most memorable and go-to family meals? I think a fun way to answer this is to kind of combine them, so I'll talk about some go-tos, and then if they were inspired by a restaurant that I happen to be staging at or working at any point in my career, I will just give a shout out to either that person or that restaurant. So let's start with, and these kind of grow in complexity, so I'll start with the kind of like lowest lift, most frequently done ones, and then we'll go into the kind of more complex, maybe once only in your kind of tenure at that restaurant kind of staff meals. So I think the first one, the obvious standout, is any like pasta with red sauce, which I think proliferates across cultures. We would call it spag bowl because we had this guy from the UK who would be like, oh, spaghetti bolognese. This obviously translates to things like lasagna, where you can kind of make it in a hotel pan or a gastro and just either prep it in the day in advance. That's also ideal. And 9 times out of 10, because this is like pasta and protein and like a kind of rich tomato sauce, this almost always goes with a salad. This is how I prefer to eat it. Maybe we should pause and talk about like staff meal fundamentals, because I think the overarching craving from folks, especially if it's your only meal of the day, it's the only time that you're actually getting to sit down and eat something, the roll your eyes at starch, protein, and veg that all of us kind of like cringe at thinking about with culinary school and menu management actually provides a lot of help when you're planning out staff meals. So I've certainly gotten roasted when I was in charge of staff meal and I would put up something that was like vegetable and meat and there was no starch. Everybody always gets upset at that. The same goes for if you're almost doing like potato and vegetable and there's no protein. That's also really not nice to have. And then I think the thing that most people would elevate a lot of folks' staff meals and just their food in general is thinking about like, what's the finishing move on this dish, or what's the thing that's going to make this pop? And so maybe that's something like a sauce, acidity, a garnish like chopped spring onions or peanuts, or, you know, safety wise, or sesame seeds, anything like that. Feta cheese is another really good one where you can just order something that actually happens to kind of like give a garnish or make it feel finished at the end. That tends to really help. Okay, some more favorites that I wrote down. I have like the stereotypical like curry with rice, and I know curry is like also roll your eyes at term, but it's the, you know, we have some chicken thighs, we have some, you know, pork shoulder, we have some ground beef, and we just want to kind of like turn that into a braise. You can combine the protein and veg together, making it so that that saves space in the restaurant, and then just serving that with something like a rice and a chopped spring onion or a pickle on top tends to be really good. The other kind of category that I have is like anything that centers around what you see in like quick service restaurants. So like the Chipotle burrito bowl is a really good staff food, or like I make this thing even at home now, which is like the kimchi rice bowl. So you have a base of rice, and then you do like braised gochujang pork, and then you have a little bit of kimchi, and then you have some diced cucumbers, and then you have some red onion, and then you have some cilantro on top, and then you can make a spicy mayo or like a teriyaki sauce or something like that to drizzle over the whole thing. Another one that was a huge favorite that I really liked making was like fried chicken day, and so I would get in wings, and I would basically like do a quick like 2-stage bread. So I would do flour and buttermilk in one to kind of make like a batter, and then I would take that and dip that in seasoned flour again, and then I would just kind of do the big rondeau setup and fry all of them. Then I would usually delegate out to have one person make like a potato thing. That could be mashed potatoes, potato salad, wedges, something like that, and then another person would make like a coleslaw or a salad. Again, all of those bases being covered with protein, starch, and veg. And what I would do to kind of make that even more fun is I would sometimes sometimes make like 2 different sauces. So I'd make a kind of a spicy sauce and then maybe like a sweet chili sauce. You can also do like a ranchy style sauce and then maybe something that's a little bit darker, like a soy-based sauce. All right, now let's get into some more complex ones. So Daniel Calvert, who was my sous chef when I was working as an extern at Per Se, he would make something called a biscuit-topped chowder. And I thought that was awesome. So basically what he would do is he would make a traditional roux-based chowder with potatoes and carrots and onions, and then he would put like chunks of fish in it. So that was usually like a white fish, like cod, and then that was work great for fish trim and stuff like that. And sometimes we would have a little bit of shellfish that we could use, like lobster meat or, something like that. And then that chowder, we would make a biscuit dough. So like a traditional buttermilk biscuit dough, but we'd have a big sheet of it, and we'd pour the chowder into a hotel pan, like a deep 4-inch hotel pan. Then we'd take that big sheet of biscuit dough and put it on the top, and then we'd bake the whole entire thing. And then the kind of like bottom of the biscuit dough would kind of like turn into like dumplings, like chicken and dumplings, and then the top would turn into like buttermilk biscuits. And then when you eat it, it's almost like this giant seafood pot pie. I loved that staff food, and we would almost always serve that with salad. Another one that I learned, shout out to Anthony Yang at Per Se as well. He would make a killer meatloaf, and he taught me how to, combine ground beef with like a creme fraiche, or a sour cream, with eggs and breadcrumbs and ketchup and Worcestershire sauce and parsley and diced shallots and a little bit of garlic, and all combine that together, kind of like make it into the meatloafs, and then just kind of brush it with this barbecue kind of sauce that you would make. And again, potatoes and salad, great staff food. Another one that's a favorite is this kind of lettuce wrap one. So someone makes rice, and then you make this really intensely flavored ginger spicy ground beef. So it's like it can be chicken, it can be pork, whatever, and then that ends up being something where people can just make like lettuce wraps, and you have all of another vegetable garnish, maybe, right? Like a roasted zucchini on the side. Another one that's a favorite that kind of takes a long time to make if you don't have someone that makes dough in the restaurant is the sheet pan pizza. That became really popular when I staged at Le Bernardin, because I think they almost always do that on Saturdays, and that's a great staff food, and again, serve it with salad, but they make different toppings, so every single sheet pan is a different kind of pizza, and those just come out, they slice them, and they serve them, and they're delicious. All right, let's do a couple honorable mentions. One is I had a coworker who loved making bows, and believe it or not, as long as someone's responsible for making the bows, the kind of like filling for them and the sides are really easy to delegate out for other people to make. And then when it all comes together, if you are in that place where everybody can kind of contribute to staff food all in one place, bows, so like, the steamed buns with the braised pork belly or the chicken or the beef inside is really, really great and gets people really excited for staff food when it's bows. There were certain days, whether we got, great awards or there was an anniversary coming up or someone was having their last day, we would have In-N-Out delivered to French Laundry. And that was always a phenomenal day, because not only did you get told you don't have to make staff food today, we're having In-N-Out, but it's also like if you haven't eaten for 7 hours, a double burger with fries it really hits a spot. And then the last one, if I had to talk about like the most memorable staff foods, it's when someone from the staff is leaving and it's their last day. They're probably checked out of their station and someone else is running it for them, and sous chef will tell them, make whatever you want. Literally spend the entire day making staff food. And if this person is from a random region in India or is visiting from Japan, or we had a guy from Mexico who was interning at the restaurant for a while, those staff foods are always 10 out of 10, because the person finally gets to just kind of like make food that's not for, like, literally just gets to make food for their friends, and you have all the resources of the restaurant at your disposal. Okay, I promise this is the last one before we move on, but me and my roommate, when we were living in Norway, we were the only Americans. And so on Thanksgiving, nobody thought that was a thing. It was just a normal Thursday, but we would always make it a point to order a turkey like weeks in advance, because that's not normal, and we would throw down for Thanksgiving, delegate tasks out to everybody to make sure that it all came together. And then we would also invite some of our purveyors to eat Thanksgiving with us, but again, it was like a normal Thursday, which felt very weird for the couple of years that I was there. But anyways, Thanksgiving staff food is a favorite as well. Question from Jesse is, where do you see yourself in a couple years, maybe owning a restaurant or writing a book? All right, let's take those one by one. So right now, my focus is on building repertoire. So those are the educational products that will ultimately be the suite of offerings offerings that Repertoire has. In addition to that, all of the free-to-consume content that Repertoire will have. So like the podcast and the YouTube content and the shorts and the TikToks and all that stuff. Basically growing that to a place where it's helping the most people possible in a profitable way. I have no doubt that I will have a restaurant someday, but it's not going to be in the way that you think where like I'm at the helm. So the kind of stereotypical examples that you think about with like Grant Achatz having a restaurant and Renee Redzepi having a restaurant where like they're the face of the thing. And, you know, you might see them there day to day and night to night. But what I see my most impact that I can have in the restaurant space is helping others kind of like launch their restaurant and almost be like a background person. So you might be able to talk to me in 20 years and be like, I have like 8 restaurants, from the sense of, you know, maybe I own specific smaller percentages in those businesses, but I can be more of an advisor role and then come in and ultimately help with all of the stuff that I build to make sure that they're operating at a profitable level, at a sustainable level, at a like their HR is good. Like what I don't want to do is I don't want to continue to kind of like chase accolades or stars, because I don't ultimately feel like that's the best use of my skills and talents. And it's taken a lot of work to get to that place, to almost hold myself back from going for kind of like a stereotypical restaurant concept. But I ultimately hope, and this is like my decision making is going to play itself out over the next couple of decades, of this is what I think is the highest leverage use of my time. That segues great into talking about a book, because of course there's going to be a book. I write so much already. I think what I'm doing a really good job of right now is kind of like taking information from other sources, filtering them through my experience, and trying to identify principles that can help you folks. And that's a great place to be right now. I think that that ultimately helps me get to a place where I can have some original ideas. I don't want to get to a place where I'm writing a book that's like a parroting of other things. Is that book going to look like a memoir? Is it going to look like a strategy book, like a nonfiction-y kind of like education, self-help kind of book? Is that going to be a cookbook in the future when I have some really ambitious ideas that finally get brought to life and there's enough of a library through like, you know, dish of the day style stuff where that can be a thing? Maybe, I'm not sure. I love writing. I'm certainly one of those people who in high school had a really poor experience with writing, and that gave me a really negative mindset around writing. But once I started to write about the things that I genuinely enjoy about helping you folks, now all of a sudden I can write for hours uninterrupted, and I actually find a real satisfaction in writing. So no, I don't have an idea where I'm like, oh, this needs to be a book someday, but I definitely get excited about thinking about a book in the future. You had 3 questions, Jesse. So your second one is, what is your opinion on the drug and alcohol abuse in the gastronomy business, and did you struggle with that at some point? So big macro picture, it's a problem, right? Like none of us are don't gaslight any of us into thinking that it doesn't exist or that it's not there. It's definitely there, but I don't judge folks, because if we take drugs as just like a word of like substances we consume in order to change our state, I drink coffee every single day. Like I consume drugs on a daily basis to change my state. I think the problem is when people there's a great quote in just addiction in general, which is you're supposed to ask not why the addiction, you're supposed to ask why the pain. And so I think if there's some sort of pain that you're trying to mask or dampen or numb or try to cover up using a substance, that could be alcohol, that could be weed, that could be just smoking cigarettes on a regular basis just to kind of like have something to distract you, something like that. I think that that's also a problem. The advice that really helped me was I had a guy who I worked with, and I think I've shared this advice before, who would basically say he took drugs and alcohol off of what he was doing as part of his day-to-day, and he saw his productivity and progress and growth just skyrocket. And so I always fell in the camp of like, why not take every advantage you can get when you're in these professional environments? Because if there was me and then someone next to me, and for all intents and purposes we're equal, we went to the same school, we maybe spent the same amount of time in externships at similar places, and we're both up for the same job, but that person is taking drugs and I am not, I clearly have an advantage. Like, and what are the ripple on effects of that? Like, my sleep is better, I have more disposable income, so I'm not so concerned about kind of like taking my knives to go get sharpened or buying a new pair of shoes so I'm more comfortable. Like, there's other benefits, secondary and tertiary, that flow on from not consuming these things. But again, it's like, don't say that it doesn't exist or that it's not a problem, because it is. The last point I'll cover is, I linked this article down in the show notes. This really stood out to me, and this kind of is the scientific backing for this statement that I just made, which is they did a big analysis of high performers. And basically what they identified was that there's 3 traits that make them stand out from the rest. And the last one relates to addiction. So the first one is a superiority complex. So you feel like you're better than everybody. The second one, which counterbalances that, is crippling insecurity. And so you constantly feel like you're never going to be good enough. The last one is impulse control. And so it's this idea that if given the option to go out on a bender and completely get blackout drunk, you're going to say no to that. If given the option to go to someone's house and smoke weed on your day off or whatever, you're going to say no to that because you have this impulse control where you're basically willing to put off short-term pleasure for long-term reward. And I think for whatever reason, I fell into that camp. I was never the person who tried to numb anything. I kind of felt things maybe even a little bit too intensely. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to get better so fast, because it was just, I felt like shit when I wasn't performing. And so it was this idea of, well, you should actually just try to get better at this thing versus trying to cover up the fact that you feel like trash. All right, last question from Jesse. Do you have a number 1 restaurant you'd like to try? There's a couple that are on my list. So the first one that comes to mind, only because it's so in line with El Bulli and I never got a chance to go there, is Alchemist. And so that's been making the headlines because it's like 20 courses and everything is designed to be kind of like provocative or humorous or kind of play with your idea of what food is. And I think that for whatever reason, has always been really, really interesting to me. And I've seen a bunch of photos and videos of people going to that place, and I really want to try it. Second one, if we can just stay on Copenhagen for a second, is to go to the new Noma space. I had the pleasure a couple of years back of going to the one in the old location. That was the one that I staged at. That was the one that I knew. And to get to eat there was really, really cool. But to be able to see them move to a new space and just see people have different menus there. I think what I would want to try the most is probably the seafood menu. And then in second place would probably be the game menu, and then the last would be the vegetarian menu. The next one that's on my list that I hope to go to soon is this place called Central in Peru. And I think that idea of serving food that goes in different altitudes is fascinating. And just the idea that they pour so many resources into R&D makes it really interesting to be able to try what they're kind of experimenting with and testing. Then I have 2 more. One is Chef's Table at Brooklyn Fair. I think the execution level that they're firing at is just crazy. And to be able to experience that type of precision and simplicity and just high quality of product would be really, really awesome to experience. And the last one, I've never done like the 3 stars in Tokyo kind of experience, right? Because a lot of these places have massive wait lists. Sometimes you can't even get in unless you know someone. And it's also a result of the 2 times that I have been to Tokyo. It's almost always been kind of preset. So I've had other plans that I've had to make months in advance. And so I haven't had the just kind of serendipitous experiences at Michelin-starred places in Tokyo. But I know that people who have done that time and dedicated that, those financial resources and that time to go experience that, they tout that as one of the best dining experiences, just period. And so I love Japanese food. I love kaiseki experiences. And so being able to go do that in Tokyo is also top of the list. But I know it's not a restaurant, but it's top of mind for me as like there's a gap in my dining, history that I just would like to fill someday. All right, question from Jarek. What are the steps you generally take in order to work at a restaurant abroad? I have no work experience, but I've been staging around restaurants for a year in my country. I'm now interested in applying abroad. It just feels kind of intimidating. I don't know where to begin. And this was kind of piled on from Ben saying, is there risk with planning and moving abroad? What is the process to reaching out to different places? And then Gabagool also asked, if you can't stage, can you offer to be an intern for a certain amount of time in order to secure a position? So I'll break this down in a couple different ways and how I kind of think about it. I'll share what I did, what worked for me, and then what I would have done if I didn't have that path. So to start, my experience was I had a friend who was working at a restaurant abroad already. And so he could vouch for me, he could talk to the chef, he could tell me what job positions were available. And so I basically had insured employment when I took the position when I moved abroad. The other thing that really helped me was I was willing to commit to it for an extended period of time. And so I told that chef that I would guarantee 6 months. So it wasn't this idea of like, oh, well, I'll come and I'll check it out. And I said, nope, I'm willing to do 6 months. I knew that it was something that I was at that stage of life where I would commit to something like that. And that also guaranteed that I would probably be able to stand out from other applicants during that stage of the hiring process. And then the last piece that really helped me was, remember I said I had a roommate who was working at that restaurant. So I lived with him as well. We were already roommates in California a couple years back. The idea there being that I had my living situation guaranteed and sorted. And that was very helpful for me because in a new country, I had to get a bank account sorted. I had to wait for my visa to get processed. And all of those things really, really helped me make sure that I had, kind of like a leg up towards the person who was just moving there alone and didn't have any other resources. And so this leads me to kind of like, if I didn't have any connections and I was interested in moving to Spain, or if I wanted to move to Singapore, or if I wanted to move to South Africa, how would I do this? And so the first piece that I tell people to do is to commit to a city. The idea that you're going to put job things out into London, and you're going to do it to Paris, and then you're also going to do it to Mexico City, it's a lot because the different visa requirements for different countries are obviously different. And so the idea that you're going to say, okay, I put out my list of restaurants. I have 15 different places, and then you can group those by country, and so then you can say, oh, cool, there's 6 of them that are in Copenhagen, 2 of them are in France, 1 of them is in the UK, and then, like 1 of them is in Cape Town, South Africa. So then you're like, okay, cool, Copenhagen is the city, because regardless of if I get my number 1, I have number 2, 3, and 4 that I'm still interested, that I would definitely be willing to fall back on, just in case. So now that you've committed to the city, and that's like the biggest thing that gets you 90% of the way there, because now what you can do is you say, okay, I'm committed to Copenhagen. And now you can say, I want to get a job somewhere in Copenhagen to get all of those other logistics that I mentioned sorted. And so remember I said I had to get a bank account, you have to get an apartment sorted, you have to get, and again, this is me with no connections. And so what you can do is you can very easily then, you're probably also overqualified for a lot of these positions. Barista, sandwich person, kind of like prep cook at a restaurant. That's not your number 1. You're not going for your number 1 place. You're just trying to get a job somewhere. And then that also makes sure that your visa gets sorted. It's much easier to switch your visa to a new employer than it is to go from 0 to 1, from no visa to having a visa. And so going ahead and trying to find somewhere that is willing to employ you, again, you might be overqualified for this place because you can execute at a Michelin level, but you're going for a sandwich lunch spot or a bistro. That at least gets your foot in the door. And now think about what all the other benefits are that come with that. You have an apartment, you have a paycheck, you have your visa sorted, and now you can apply with patience and networking. And so you can take the time to go into your number 1 and number 2 places on your list. You can sit at the bar. You can start to meet who the sous chefs are. You can start to have a conversation about what the menu is and what you're interested in and where you come from. And all of a sudden, oh, hey, you're a chef too. Like, hey, we're hiring, blah, 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 blah. And then one thing always leads to another in these situations, but that only happened in that way because you were operating from a place of patience and already underlying foundational, like, life needs are met. I think this idea that you have to just pack your suitcase and show up at the back door and hold your breath and just hope that they're going to give you a job is just a horrible way to do it. And if I was doing it all over again, and again, I didn't have any connections, those are the 3 steps. So commit to a city, get a job somewhere, even if it's not your dream place. And then once you have all of those underlying stability needs met, then start to apply, start to network, and then finally get your foot in the door and get your dream job. All right, last question comes from Jaden. I'm interested in doing a pop-up dinner or eventually an event, hopefully in the future, but I've never been to one and I'm having a hard time finding pop-up dinners. How would you go about finding pop-ups? What resources do you recommend to help find and experience? So my first question for you is, who is the pop-up tastemaker in your area? The person who has the number 1 food blog, the person who is the Instagram influencer, the person who has the YouTube channel or the travel guide or gets featured on the articles in your local area, and what pop-ups have they been to in the past? And if you can, ultimately I end up making friends with that person, sending them a DM and saying, hey, next time you get invited to a pop-up, I'd love for you to just send me a DM, or can I get on your newsletter, or whatever that person has, where you can get a heads up about where pop-ups are coming from. Just that will take a bunch of the work off of your plate and onto theirs. The second one, and you've probably tried this, but I think this is kind of a reverse hack, is to search best pop-ups and then your city, and then find the venues that hosted those pop-ups, because that person might not be doing pop-ups anymore. This might be kind of like down the, in the past, but what helps me is trying to identify who's hosted pop-ups in the past, getting in touch with those venues and saying, hey, do you have anybody who's been asking to do pop-ups at your place? And then they'll give you the name of the person who's been inquiring, because that's how I tell people to get pop-up venues. And this will also help you find your places in the future, because you can see examples of how did they set up the kitchen? How many guests were they able to do? How did they do decor? Were they offering cocktail pairings? All of these questions can get answered if you get in touch with the venues, not the people hosting the pop-ups. And the last point, which is kind of a macro view of pop-ups, and I know that I've shared this in the past, but it's worth re-saying again. Pop-ups are intentionally temporary. It's very rare to see someone who is continuing to do pop-ups for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years. It's very rare. That usually transitions into private events. That was what I did. I moved into an event production company. There's often people who will turn it into kind of like a rotating space that has kind of like a seasonality to it. I often think of like Flynn McGarry with Gem in New York. And then also it might go to like invite only. I think about like Max Shapiro with Oxalis, where he has a huge waiting list for his pop-ups, but he's a real estate guy. And then he does dinners when it makes sense. And he just pulls from that wait list where he doesn't ultimately offer tickets open to the public. But again, with pop-ups, I think there aren't rules to them. And so I think people get this over-romanticized view of, oh, I'm going to, start this from the ground up and I'm just going to put up a ticket page and I'm going to price it in a really affordable way and it's going to be casual and it's going to be exactly what I wanted. And then everybody's just going to buy and it's going to be amazing and I'm going to make a bunch of money in one day. The same amount of money that I used to make in a week, I'm going to make in a day. And they don't often factor in all of the other headaches. And all of us know that when you do a pop-up, it's not just the day of the pop-up, right? Like there's 2 days of planning and logistics and phone calls and emails and staffing and sourcing and writing and ticket pages that lead up to that day. And then there's obviously the day itself. And then almost always there's a day after, right? Like you're so tired, you say, oh, let's clean up this tomorrow. Or, oh, let's go back and do a walkthrough of the venue to make sure we left it as clean as we needed to. Or, oh, we need to kind of like do the social media posting after or edit the content. Like there's all the things that needed to be done afterwards. So people think that, oh, pop-ups are amazing because I'm making so much money in one day, but they don't extrapolate it out across the entire workload that was required for a pop-up. And that's, again, why I think they're temporary. That's why I think people kind of over-romanticize them because it sounds so cool. One night only. I'm at this place. I'm getting to do whatever I want. When in reality, there's so much other complexity that underlies a pop-up. And so when I think about dinners and I think about the people who do them in the best way, I think about the people who remove as much risk as possible. So how can I make sure that at least 50% of the seats are already sold before I even launch it? How can I have a excited group of people, whether that's an email list or Instagram followers or, like loyals at a winery. So it's like, how can I partner with a winery so that they sell half the tickets to their wine club members? Or I can, to that point, have wine sponsored. So it's like, I'm not, again, remove risk. People who kind of like take profits from event number 1 and buy a full silverware, plateware set so that they don't have to do rentals for pop-up number 2, or we're going to take dishes that work really, really well. We know they're going to crush. Those are the ones that are going to be the menu because we're just trying to build the audience. Again, how can you remove risk as much as you can? And I know I'm giving a lot of this advice and it might make sense here, but I heard this great quote where it's like, you know it up here, but you need to feel it here. And so you might need to just go make those mistakes. That's totally fine. But if you're going to take a word from the wise, try to remove risk, try to get connected with people who have done it before, and try to understand that this is a temporary thing and you should try to track it towards a longer term goal. Do you want to go into events? Do you want to own a restaurant? Do you want to launch a brand? Do you want to capture content that helps you get more opportunities in the future that can help you get your next job? Believe it or not, I answer questions like this all the time and post additional bonus content, things I'm thinking about inside of the Repertoire Pro community. I do have a promo right now that makes your first month just $1 with the code that's down low in the description of this video if that promo is still happening. Otherwise, the link that's in the description will take you to the page where you can sign up for that. It's a community of other networking and growth-focused professionals, and we just talk about stuff that's on our minds that's kind of just more permanent than the YouTube comment section, and it's a lot less noisy than a platform like Facebook. And so that's also what I'm building. If you didn't know about it, you can definitely check it out down low in the description. Thanks to the folks that asked the questions and for the other folks that just decided to upvote them because you wanted to see what I would say. I've got another AskJK linked up somewhere around here if you want to check out that next. My name is Justin Khanna. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope you have a good one.